All right. I'm so ready for this topic, Sharon. It's a good one.
It is. Well, good morning and welcome to the latest episode of the Project Failure Files. This series is for anyone who manages projects or project teams for a living. I am Sharon Weaver, CEO, Smarter Consulting.
You got to remember your own company name, Sharon. That's a key part of this. Yes, too. I am Christian Buckley, founder of Collab Talk, and welcome to another episode of our series where Sharon and I explore project management topics from the perspective of what not to do as you manage projects. In each episode, we talk about the common pitfalls, share some personal stories and experiences, and explore strategies and best practices to help you to be successful.
In this episode, we are going to talk about one of the most common scenarios all of us have experienced.
Yes.
Building versus buying. And no other topic better represents the "it depends"
Right.
cliche than this one.
Yep. I know we're going to get into it, but the most common mistake here is looking at the short-term savings. This is frustrating with leaders versus the long-term costs of building and maintaining something that you've developed yourself.
But then again, if you have the team and the skills and you know what you're doing and you understand what's happening and you know what you're doing with it, then you might be able to very quickly spin out a solution that meets your immediate needs faster and more cost effective than going through the approvals and red tape and budget and ongoing maintenance and support cost of a very expensive third-party solution.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it does depend. And as always, this should be a great conversation. And as with every episode, please feel free to comment throughout the episode, share your experiences and any examples or feedback that we may have missed.
Okay, let's get started with some definitions and talk about what we mean by build versus buy.
Yeah, this is funny from the SharePoint perspective that we've both worked in this space, but having the conversation of I actually had a client that was trying to build a CRM platform out of SharePoint, build it themselves. I'm like, why?
Because you can.
Can you do it? It's like, I guess you could go and build something and store it all in SharePoint. It's not designed for that. Like, I guess you could, but should you? No.
And
no, you
build versus buy also comes with the configuration versus customization conversation too, because you think about a tool like SharePoint, and SharePoint is a platform. It's a product, but it's a platform. And so it has the capability to configure and customize to extend its capabilities. Not all tools have that either.
Yeah. I mean, there's the whole argument. I mean, there's different layers to this. There's the whole like, well, what are we in business to actually do? Are we a software development shop, or are we, are we a product company selling services or whatever? Where do we want to go hire people and have to maintain that level of expertise to keep all of those applications running? Or do we want to buy something which is pricier than what we want, but give it to us all that capability, more features than we are looking for now, but could enable us to do more things later, and then not have to maintain that.
Yeah, this is the whole DIY conversation, right? So I know my kids really love watching YouTube videos of the guys who build all their own stuff. And, in just, one short 30-minute episode, they like gut a closet and rebuild everything and do all this fancy work in there. And here's my kids, we should DIY our closet. And I'm like, that was like 3 months worth of work on fast forward and very fancy editing.
And years of experience
for somebody who knows what they're doing. Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's why is the shorthand of this is that where I had, and I've shared this before, but I went to work for the phone company. I was taken over from a guy who is retiring at the end of that week. So we only had 1 week, 5 days of overlap, and he had already checked out. And on that last day, we all went out to dinner or went out to lunch together as his kind of farewell. But during that week, so everything he had documented for that role, things that I was taking over, were in a giant, dense 3-ring binder. And I would go ask questions.
Binder.
And he's like, it's in the binder. And I'm just like, yeah, well, I just dug through the binder for an hour and a half. I feel stupider the longer it takes me. I'm not finding the thing. And it's like, just answer the question or show me where it is. And that's a whole different discussion. Where, for example, he showed me the workflow, which didn't explain. Then he had to walk me through the workflow, and I'm writing notes all around the workflow. I'm like, your documentation, your workflow did not adequately explain the process. I had to anyway, but now I'm just getting riled up.
I think if we're going to boil this down, building versus buying, to my DIY example, is the idea of you can build a table from scratch and you can buy a pre-built table for anything. You can do this, right? But in software, it's no different. In technology, it's no different. And oftentimes we're tasked as project managers with, working on projects where our stakeholders are trying to decide which way is a better way. And so then we talk about, what do we have available to be able to help with that decision? And it depends. It really does depend, because if you're really good at building things and you have all the skills that you need and you have everything there, it could be an affordable solution for a high quality item. At the same time, if you have no idea how to use a nail gun, perhaps maybe going and getting an inexpensive table, even if it's used, could be a better solution. So I think whenever you look at this, the idea is, what kind of resources do you have available, and what is it that you're trying to accomplish? Which I think is, we're going to talk about, some of those key factors of how we decide whether or not we should buy or build.
And this decision has an impact of a number of different areas. Again, if you don't have the skill, or even if you have the skills, those people are probably working other projects.
They're just sitting around looking for things to do. They're bored. Of course.
But it could impact your ability to, further innovate in the projects and the things which are actually what you're supposed to be focused on. It makes you less flexible if any of those other existing projects are, suddenly go sideways. And, it could be, is it aligned with your overall business goals? I mean, just from the example that you shared too, sometimes if you've got the ability, the knowledge, the skills to go and build it yourself. I've been in those circumstances where we didn't have the budget to go buy. And so we just thought, okay, we're just not going to be able to do this. Like, wait, but I think we can go and build something fairly quickly that would give us most of what we need for this without, any cost, additional cost other than, the cost of the personnel and our time. So yeah, it is one of those huge, it depends situations.
Back to the good old MVP discussion, right? What's the minimal viable product that I need to be successful in this moment? Maybe we can build it ourselves.
So let's walk through it. Like, what is the decision-making process that you go through when you're trying to decide, is this something that we want to go and try and do ourselves? Or do we want to go hire experts or purchase a product to go and do things? Like, what is that?
How much money do we have, and how long are we going to keep getting it? Because, there's one thing to be said for, I have a budget, but you have to think about, no matter whether you buy or build, what's the long-term maintenance and support budget for whatever it is you're doing also. So the overall lifetime of whatever it is you're buying or building, what does that budget look like?
Yeah. Well, part of that too is it really comes down to the scope of what you're talking about. Like, are we talking about?
We have to care about what we need out of it?
Well, like because it's a slightly different discussion if we're talking about, in my example, if someone says, well, we need a CRM platform. And I would just say, like, look, CRM, it's like email. Like, I'm not going to go build an email platform from scratch. Why would I go build a CRM platform from scratch? Again, very mature, really incredibly inexpensive versus the time to build a robust solution that even closely compares with. But I think most of, like, in those extreme cases, like, no, I'm not going to go build a CRM platform. I'm not going to build an email platform. However, when you're looking at a team-based productivity or automation, workflows, things like that, like, yeah, it's more economical probably to go and, if you are using the Microsoft Power Platform, for example, to invest in the licenses, the premium licenses, the connectors, to build some automations versus go buy a third-party tool. Yes, it could do all of that, and then 100 other things that you don't need when you could just inexpensively build the suit, and automate that, within the team. If you've got the skills, if you've got the people.
Well, and even if you have the budget and the resources and it aligns with your business initiatives, do you have the time? Do you need it to be done right away? Or is it something that it's okay, you've got, an extra 6 to 12 months just laying around to give to it?
Well, and one other mistake. So we've talked about time, we talked about skills, we talked about budget, we've talked about, understanding the scope of that. The other part of that is, and you mentioned earlier, is like the support that is also the scalability and support of that. So over time, and this happens with, and I use the example of building like, Power Apps and workflows and things like that. One of the scalability problems is that somebody looks at, like, I developed this for myself or for my direct reports, like the 6 or 7 of us on my team. And then an executive saw that and says, oh, that's fantastic, Christian. Let's go and let's let everybody in the company go and use that. Well, I'm not a developer. I built that automation that works for what we're doing at this lower level.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean that it's going to scale up and be supportable for the entire company. Or it's, it's architected, or the data on the back end, it's pointing to SharePoint right now, or it's using an Access database or something or other. Like, these things are not scalable to what is needed for now 10,000 people using that.
I have a perfect story for this. All
right.
So many thousands of years ago, I got brought in to work on a SharePoint project, and they brought me in and they basically said, hey, we've got this request list. It's a request form that comes in, and the request form comes in, and then we store the information, and then we do the thing, and then we check it off, and it's just like a status list. I'm like, okay, that's great. And they're like, can we do this in SharePoint? And I said, well, I have some questions for you. And so I started asking them things like, how often do they come in? How many do you get? What do you do with them? Who needs to look at them? All the basic questions. Oh, we only get maybe 100 a month, and it's only our internal team that looks at them, and it's only a few little check boxes. And I'm like, okay, this sounds sustainable within SharePoint. We could probably do this. It'll probably last you a few years before you even have to think about anything. They're like, okay, that sounds great. So we went in, we built this really great system that had this really great form, and the team loved it. Well, they loved it so much that the people who were using it actually wanted to submit a lot more items than were being submitted. It's just that the system was kind of bad. So when we created a better system for it, it grew so quickly that thousands of requests were coming in every single month. And what ended up happening is that after about 6 months or so, it completely had to get moved over into a SQL database because SharePoint literally couldn't handle it anymore. And so, it's this idea of, even sometimes when you're having those conversations up front, you have no idea long-term what's going to happen with that solution. And sometimes buying it gives you the ability to scale up within the tool, but sometimes customizing it gives you a little bit more flexibility, because had we bought that solution, it grew faster than they expected. 6 months down the road, maybe that tool wouldn't have worked anymore.
Yep. Well, thinking of like pros and cons of building, some of the advantages, the pros, is that you're able to build something that is more nuanced, more customized to meet your specific business requirements, your specific needs, the culture of your organization, the way that you work and do things, integrations with specific tools and systems that are out there. That gives you greater control over features, the design, the way, to make the look and feel of those things. And it's a way that you can innovate as you're building, but it also means that you've got all of those upfront development costs that you maybe hadn't planned for. It means that you need to maintain that technical expertise. How many clients, Sharon, have you worked with that built a system and then those people that built it left and they had no one left who knew how to maintain?
Many.
That happens again and again and again.
Not if it breaks, not if you need support. When it breaks, when you need support, when you don't know what to do about it, how are you going to handle that? And if you have bought a piece of software, you can simply call the company and say, hey, I need help. And they say, yes, we'd be happy to help you. If you make it yourself, there's nobody.
You're responsible for maintenance, upgrades, support, all those different pieces. Well, security. Exactly. I mean, the other things to think about too is that when you buy it, the pros are much quicker turnaround, the faster implementation. So
it's already made.
That time to value is there. It can be immediate. Lower upfront cost. You're not having to pay all the people their time. Again, if you're moving funny money, internal dollars, it may be hidden, but the costs are higher to build versus buying that product. If you're building from scratch. And then you also then have their support, you have their expertise, you have regular updates, feature requests, you kind of get into that model. The downside to that is then you are, held to their limited customizations and integrations. And so that may not be perfectly aligned. It's it's that 80-20 rule where you get like 80% of what you need, there can you do without the other 20%. And then you get into that where you've got depending how big you are and how influential you'll be on their product roadmap, but you start having those conversations. But then you also become dependent on third-party vendors. And I've been in a couple of companies where the solutions that we purchased were discontinued. Yeah. And so there was, in one case, they actually had like an insuring company. They had like insurance from an engineering company that said, like, if this happened, they would actually provide the support for like 12 months or 6 months after that time to move off of that platform and move
it's on to you, like getting your data out, migrating it into a different tool, starting from scratch to kind of decide, am I picking a different tool? Am I building something new?
Yeah. And there's the other hidden costs associated with that, additional licensing fees. A lot of the annual support can be anywhere from 10 to, I've seen like 40% at the higher end of whatever you paid for the licenses. That's the up to 40% of that fee per year for the maintenance and for the support. And then they may limit the number of tickets that you can submit in a month as well. So understand those SLAs.
Well, I was thinking, and in this new cloud-based world, in the modern software world, you're also facing the idea of subscription, ongoing subscription costs that may be associated with those tools. And a lot of times they have like seat license limits. So either it's a minimum number or a maximum number, or you have to true up all the time, as opposed to even like if you're buying a third-party app or a third-party client side piece of software that maybe you can, once you own it, like, even if you're not paying for ongoing support, at least you own it. In the new cloud-based world, that's not even really a thing. I mean, you don't pay your payment 1 month and poof, you don't have your software anymore.
In fact, that's a popular support issue where people are like, well, we had these features. We don't understand. Like, this piece is grayed out now, or this, I can't get access to this. It's like, talk to your admin. Did you pay for the licenses?
We've changed the licensing terms, and now you don't have that button anymore.
Right. Well, thinking about this too, like Sharon, so what would you say, what's the approach to making that build versus buy decision?
I mean, I think, we've talked a lot about planning and risk management and proactive, kind of thinking about things. And I think if we take a lot of those things we've already talked about and apply them to this, it's the idea of proactively understanding, what am I trying to accomplish? What kind of budget do I have? What kind of resources do I have at my, availability? If I take all of that information, then I can look and say, okay, based on what I have and what I plan to have, which scenario lines up with me best. So if I'm thinking about my table example, do I already own all the tools that it's going to take for me to do this? Do I already have the skill set to do this? Can I afford it? Versus, do I just need something quick and can I just go get what I need?
Right. It's, I would say, to do like a cost benefit analysis. The problem is most organizations are not equipped with they're not able to really do a true comparison and understand what are the costs, the time of building it themselves, and kind of the long-term costs associated with that. And I would even say that, because I think that what not to do is to make a decision either way without doing some kind of a needs assessment. I mean, really, you can say what not to do is, just jump in. All right, we're just going to go build something. Don't do that. We're just going to go buy something. Don't do that.
Just assumptions, right? Just assume that anything off the shelf isn't going to meet your needs. It's going to be too expensive. It's not going to solve your problem. And building is always the right answer, no matter what, which is what a lot of software development companies, we've got a whole bunch of developers sitting around. Let's just build whatever we need. And so they just discount the idea and assume that an off-the-shelf product isn't going to be a good solution. Or the flip is assume that you can't make what you need, that you don't have what you need, and that you have to buy something when maybe you have something already inside of your environment that will actually solve your problem if you were just willing to maybe look at it a little bit differently or allocate a resource to it or something like that.
Isn't that funny? If you go in and do the actual assessment. So this is like going in and doing any project plan where you kind of break it down into its core components and really understand, okay, this is truly what we're trying to solve. Here's the priority of what we need of those things. Is that, hey, couldn't we really already do this with some of what we already have? That's often the answer is yes.
Yeah.
But when that's not the case, you need to, again, if you're approaching it from here's what we need, not based on, because a huge mistake that companies make in the buy is they get all excited about, we could go and buy this and have all these different things. Like, yeah. And yet we don't have the customization. We don't have these integrations. Again, if you've not done the assessment, you're going to miss a whole lot of things. And so maybe there is a cheaper way there. It's most likely it's a hybrid answer where there's a tool that is not attempting to do everything that you want, can give you a good portion of that. And then with some customization and with some, with a Power App and a few Power Automates, some workflows developed, we can get to what a more expensive tool was with a lesser tool and some do it ourselves. But all of that, you can't reach that conclusion if you've not done the assessment and really understood, here's what we're trying to do.
In fact, so I'm a big, huge proponent of gap analysis. Yep. I'm a big believer in gap analysis, and I have a whole presentation.
Analyses.
I do a presentation on this, and one of my real world stories, and I've probably told this before on here, but one of my real world stories is that in one of my Six Sigma belt projects, there was an existing belt that had already been working on a project, and they were doing a tool selection project. That's actually a Six Sigma project, was to do this tool selection. And so this belt had to go do something else. They were no longer on the project, but they had basically already done all the work. They'd already made the decisions, and they just needed me to come in and basically bring it across the finish line. And I was like, before we do this, can I just do a quick analysis just so I understand and I'm up to speed on what's going on? And also, here's a tip, always do your own analysis just to make sure you know what's going on. So I did exactly what you're saying, because, I don't know what the previous person had done. I looked through their notes, but I wanted to do my own. I did the analysis and I asked them, what is it you're trying to accomplish? Bake it against the requirements. What is it you're trying to do? They already had like $1 million budget. They were ready to buy a new tool. And here's the list of things they needed. Well, I took that back and I compared it to what they had. They had the best of breed off the shelf software already. It was the best thing that existed. I reached out to the software company and said, hey, these are the gaps that they're missing in your piece of software. And so they're looking to buy another piece of software. What can you do to solve that problem? And that best of breed software sure did say, well, if you'll stay with us, we will add those features for you. Yep. And then I found out they just hadn't really been trained on the software they had. So I came back and we had the discussion of, you don't even need to buy a different piece of software. You just simply need to be trained on what you have. And the software you have has been willing to go ahead and add the features you're missing. And you can keep what you have and you can be successful with it. And so I think sometimes, to your point, this making sure that you have the analysis really helps you to understand what is it that you actually need so that you can make the right choice.
Can I also point out there's something from what you just said too, is it really points to having the right trusted partners in place. Because I know you, I know the way that you run in your company is that if you went in when the client says, we need this and this, and you do the assessment and you're saying, no, actually you don't need that. This is what you need. Unfortunately, I know like some bigger players, especially in the consulting world, where they will convince you that build is the better option because that's where they get the most of their billable hours towards that. Not every partner, consulting partner is really looking out for the best interest of their clients in that way. Like I was actually, I in past companies, worked from product companies, had my own salespeople that were angry with me because I killed a couple sales because, and what I could, unsuccessfully tried to explain to the salespeople is that we were not going to make that customer happy. We did not have what they actually needed, and our competitor did. I redirected them towards the right solution for their issue. Now, in a couple of cases, and I used to be able to tell you, like, document this. I'm not making this up, folks. Where these, when we expanded, we added a new product, these companies came back and they actually mentioned it. And I know this because my CTO, head of sales, VP of sales, came to me and said, just like, we got these customers that we had lost earlier. They came back and bought later. And both of these customers said, we want to make sure that you know that it's because we trust Christian Buckley because he directed us to the right solution, which was away from you guys for that other product. And now we're back. So it was the integrity and trust there was much more important than that, the short-term sale. When ultimately we would have not been able to resell, we would have lost those customers long-term and probably would have had to give them their money back because the product didn't work for that. So anyway, having the right partners in place is so critical to help you go through, do that cost benefit analysis. So just be very careful with the partners that you have in place. What are they telling you? Is it towards their best interests or is it to yours?
Yeah, well, and I know there's a lot of consulting firms. I mean, and I remember even when I was working in enterprise business, and we would actually hire consulting firms to come in and do those decisions for us so that it was less skewed because they didn't benefit from whatever we did. Right. So we would bring a third-party consulting group in to help us make those build versus buy decisions or vendor selections, and things like that, because that way they could say, okay, let me take all the information. We'll help you make an objective decision. We'll make recommendations, and then you can do the thing. And that is one thing that our company really enjoys doing is we really enjoy helping people figure out what is the right technology you need. What do you need to do with it? And we are not a development firm in the idea that we don't like build custom solutions for people specifically. And we're not selling a specific solution in that same way that like those larger companies are. And we really do enjoy helping our clients kind of make those decisions. But either way, whether you bring a partner in, whether you do it yourself, always make sure that you're doing the analysis so that you know that you're making the right decision.
And then you need to you do the analysis, you share that with the rest of the stakeholders and say, hey, look, these are our options. Here's what we see are the pros and cons for each of those decisions. Here we are with, integration, compatibility, Here's what the maintenance support if we built versus this cost, and look at all those things. You'll have a better idea of what that cost of doing it yourself would be, and then make a decision. And even if you look at that and you're leaning towards, hey, I think we could build this and do this, involve the stakeholders, because they're going to have different perspectives that may change that opinion. They'll have a better idea, likely the owners of that project, that request, and the outcomes are, benefiting them, of the long-term roadmap and strategy, which could change the perspective all around.
Well, and theoretically, if you're thinking through this and you are strategically planning and you've already done the analysis and you know what it is you're going to be doing, you should also be thinking down the road, like you said, of, is this something we're going to need to maintain? Are we going to maybe strategically grow it? At some point in the future, are we going to switch and do something else? Because, when we think about like in the business models of crawl, walk, run, sometimes we're going to make something internal as an MVP just to get us through from here to here. When we're ready to have a product that we're ready to buy, we will have our data kind of organized and cleaned up in a way that makes sense so that we're ready to move into that larger product. Or maybe the opposite, right? Maybe vice versa. Maybe we're going to get an off-the-shelf software to get us going quickly and get us, at this crawl or walk stage, with the idea that behind the scenes, we're building a bigger solution that we might own, that we can bring our stuff into. So I think there's always, not just analyzing for today, but strategically planning for tomorrow and for ongoing as well.
To kind of recap this, talking about, the importance of going through and doing that evaluation. It's about making sure that you are smart about what you're spending money on, how much time that you're putting into this, the resource that you're using, being responsible, looking at the body of work, the other things that have going on. Is this the best way that we can spend our time? So there's even if you think, hey, we could support it and maintain it, again, it's a pretty major thing to say, hey, we're going to go build this solution and then go and support it and roll it out and integrate, do all the other things. Again, I'm not saying one way is right or wrong. It depends on the scope of that. But doing the assessment means you have a better understanding of the problem you're trying to solve, and the solutions you come up with, the direction that you have, the decision-making capability improves, versus I've got an idea of what this is. Let's go and build it, or let's go and buy it. So thinking about like call to action. So what would you recommend to people to do when they're making this decision? What can they go and do?
I think the biggest thing, the call to action on this is, well, I'm going to say don't make assumptions. Don't assume that you already know what the right answer is. Don't assume that building or buying inherently is just always the right or always the wrong answer. Make sure that you really do understand. So do understand what it is you need, how long it's going to take, what kind of budget you have, what your full resources are, and what your long-term strategic plan is, so that when you do make that decision, you're making a decision that you're not going to look a year or 2 years down the road and be like, oh, why did I do this? Because, project failure files, right? Like so many stories of where people have made an assumption that one's the right thing. They do it 2 years down the road. They're kind of kicking themselves thinking, this is such a pain. So make sure you do your due diligence.
Isn't it funny? We always come back to this whole thing of, like I always say, as you always say, we have a very similar saying is that, follow a structured approach, have a methodology. This is yet another example where if you follow that structured approach, it's going to save you a lot of headaches, a lot of pain. And so if you're looking for help, like go get help. There are experts, outside experts, that can help you develop that process, develop that methodology, come in and do that analysis and help you with that decision making. So if you really struggle, that might be one of the most effective ways of utilizing an outside consulting expert on that, is to go and do that assessment for you, provide you with the data from which you can make a decision of how to move forward on that. Because you might be thinking and start down the path of building it yourself and on a technology like the Power Platform, for example. And these experts sometimes can say, here's how that won't scale. Here's the problem with that, and leverage their experience. Obviously find the right partners for that. But that's just a safe approach. Upfront planning never killed anybody.
Yeah, no, there's so many hidden risks, right? And I always think about this. There's so many hidden risks when you are not an expert in something specific that you're like, oh yeah, I can totally do this. And then you find out later, oh yeah, it actually can't. So yeah, definitely plan and do your diligence.
Yeah. Well, I know, as always, this is a huge topic, a lot to cover. Hopefully folks watching, listening in, you got some value out of that. You can find us back here next Monday, every Monday morning at 9 a.m. Pacific. We are here. You can follow us out on the socials. We're still out there on X. We're not giving up X. We're not walking away. We're
I'm on all the things. I'm just on all the things.
We are on all the things. You can find our names everywhere. And then, of course, we've got our community page out on Facebook currently. We're building out a few different things, but share your stories, share your questions, your examples. If you have topics that we've not yet covered, let us know. We'd love to expand. In fact, there's 2 more that I have in my notes I need to add in, Sharon. So we've got 2 more weeks of content adding on to our current plan. But you can find all the past episodes out on YouTube, out on my profile on Buckley Planet. I know Sharon also links to all those things, but so you can find them wherever we are. And thank you for watching.
See you next week.
We'll see you next week. Yes, I really want to know.